Hi everyone. Today we have the presentation about faster functionality on Magento Cloud by Nadiia Syvokonenko and Michael Casey, who are both developers on Magento Cloud team. So guys, handing it out to you. Once you are ready, feel free to start.
All right, thanks, Evgeny. So welcome everyone. We're going to talk about Fastly on Magento Cloud. A little bit about us. My name is Michael Casey. I'm a software development engineer here on the cloud team. And I'm joined by Nadiia Syvokonenko, and she's also a software development engineer on the cloud team. She'll be talking more in the second half of the slideshow. Let's go over a general overview of Fastly on Magento Cloud, benefits, etc. So Fastly is an HTTP full-page cache service. It's based on Varnish software, if you've ever heard of that, but it's very much enhanced, has a lot more features, and even the VCL has enhancements. It functions as a content delivery network, so you get accelerated page loads with points of presence all over the world, so they're close to the customers and they get lower latency and faster response times. And also it protects your origin server from heavy load and even some types of malicious loads like denial of service and so on. Fastly is an integral part of Magento Cloud. It's bundled with Magento Cloud Pro and Starter. It's a core part of the Magento Cloud offering. So we really would never recommend someone run Magento Cloud without Fastly. It's part of it. It's part of what makes it great. It's bundled and tested with Magento Cloud, so you know it's going to work better than any other caching service. And we also work with the Fastly team whenever we identify problems or whenever we have questions about integration with Magento Cloud and so on. So you know that it's going to be a good experience. With Fastly on your site, you can get much better performance than if you didn't have Fastly. With a 94% hit rate, which is the highest we've seen from our customer sites, your performance basically goes up by 16 times because only 6% of the requests are actually hitting the origin server, and the other 94% are basically free because they're just being handled by the edge caches. With the origin shield, it further increases hit rate, and that's how you can get to that type of number. Because instead of the edge caches having to ask the origin, the edge caches can ask the origin shield, and so that can improve your hit rate. Like I said, you get lower latency because the customers only have to go to the edge cache near their physical location instead of the origin server. Whenever you get a cache hit, it doesn't add any load to your site. That's why I mentioned it was free. And also there's edge side includes, so instead of having to invalidate a whole page if something changed on the page, the edge caches can synthesize that page out of smaller components, and most of those components can be cached. So you have availability benefits. Because Fastly is a CDN, it's going to handle a lot of the traffic for you, depending on your hit rate. So that includes things like flash sales, high traffic days like Black Friday. If you have crawlers that are trying to crawl your site, and they might be, their rate might be a little bit too high or whatever. We see misbehaving crawlers, but Fastly helps protect against that. And even some types of denial of service attacks. That does depend. If they're able to hit pages that are bypassing the cache, then that wouldn't protect you. But in general, most of the pages on your site are going to be served by Fastly edge caches. So that means most of the load would be absorbed by Fastly. And Fastly has a huge network, so they can handle basically practically unlimited amount of volume. There is a limit, but it's for the entire network, so it would be like probably. I mean, I would have to guess, but it would be much bigger than most attacks. Well, let's talk about your Fastly credentials, how you find them and use them on your site. So you get your credentials whenever you're provisioned your Pro or Starter environment. Usually we put them in a folder for you, mnt shared fastly_tokens.txt. and there you'll find your service ID and your API key. You can enter those credentials in the Magento admin panel or with the Magento Cloud environment level variables. And there's some more information here at the bottom on DevDocs. And then I'll show you here in a second on where you add them. Here's the Magento admin panel. If you go to Stores, Configuration, and Advanced, you'll find the Fastly configuration. And then here's the place where you enter your service ID and API token. And then you can see there's a Test Credentials button, and then you can save that config. The other way to specify the Fastly credentials is with project level environment variables, or actually it's with environment level environment variables. You can see here there are these rather long strings that you can put into your variable section. Use the env prefix so that they go with environment variables on your actual Linux environment. And then you have config default system, which is all pretty standard, and then full page cache. And these are double underscores, by the way, between the actual. So this is a single underscore here, but full page cache, and then Fastly is a double underscore. Fastly API key, Fastly service ID, and so this way you can specify the credentials without actually having to put them in your store code. So that can be advantageous for reasons I'll cover later. So let's talk about some best practices on how you can ensure high performance and get the most out of using Fastly on Magento Cloud. One of the biggest things to get good performance and have a good experience is to make sure your overall cache hit rate is above 85%. Basically, any site with a cache hit rate below 85% could improve that, and improving that will improve your overall site performance. As I mentioned earlier, it's like a multiplier effect. The higher you get that number, the much better your site can perform, the more load you can absorb. So basically anything above 90% is good. You don't have to worry about it after that. And you can use the Fastly API to check your cache hit rate. There's links to Fastly docs here where they talk about this API request more in detail. But basically you can just run this curl request, and of course you'd replace this API token with the credentials I showed earlier, and same with the service ID. And then it will show you the overall cache hit rate for your entire service or your entire site. And you do want to see that above 85%. If it's below 85%, usually the culprit would be third-party modules, because in general the Magento code out of the box allows caching as it should. But we have seen third-party modules. A lot of third-party modules are very well behaved and work great with Fastly, but some of them maybe weren't designed with it in mind, or maybe they just could tweak a few things here or there. So just for custom code, you can troubleshoot to see which code is causing the problem, maybe contact the author or modify them to where they allow caching where appropriate. Because in general, Fastly does respect the HTTP cache headers coming from Magento. So if Magento tells Fastly not to cache something, it will respect that. So it just depends. You can troubleshoot individual pages. Oftentimes, like for example, the cart page would never be cached. But there are some other pages maybe that should be cached, like a product page. And so you can test individual pages, especially your home page, which is often the most loaded page, using your browser developer tools or a standalone HTTP client such as curl. You're going to look at the response headers, and you're looking for the x-cache header. You need to refresh the page a few times, because if you are loading the page for the first time, it could just be that it wasn't in the cache. But after you refresh it a few times, it should have had a chance to go into the cache at that point. Then you should make sure that the header, the x-cache header, includes the word hit in it. And that might look like hit miss, etc. Any of those are good results, because that means that your Fastly cache is serving the page directly. And then if it says miss, that means that it probably can't cache the page, especially if you refreshed a few times, because that would indicate that the request is coming straight from the origin server. Another great thing you can do is to warm up the cache after a deployment. Since if you do a deploy, it will flush the cache, which is understandable, but you can warm up those pages. It's not 100% necessary, because the first request will fill the cache up, but of course this does help make those initial requests faster for customers. So you can use the warm up pages field in the Magento env YAML. And here's an example of two URLs in the Magento env YAML. And then here's a link to DevDocs where you can read more about that. And there's wildcards and so on. And then finally, what the best practice is, it's very important not to duplicate Fastly credentials on development environments. So if you have a database dump of your production environment and then you import that into development, you want to make sure that you do not have the same Fastly credentials on your development environment. And that's just because if you have if you're flushing the cache in your development environment, you only want it to flush your development cache. You don't want it to flush your production cache. And if you have the Fastly API credentials in your development environment, then it can send those API requests, and Fastly will think that's the production environment asking for its cache to be flushed. So just make sure if you're using database dumps that you clean them, or if you do import a database dump, make sure you remove those credentials as soon as possible from your development environment. And you can also use those environment variables I showed earlier to set the Fastly credentials instead of the admin panel, and that should help keep your Fastly credentials out of the database. So in summary, you want to verify your overall cache hit rate is above 85%. You can troubleshoot individual pages if you think a page is not loading in the cache, or if you want to troubleshoot high traffic pages. And you should clean database dumps to make sure that you don't import your production credentials into development. Let's talk about mass redirects, forwarding URLs for SEO purposes. This is a common request that we have to talk about how to do this and what the best way to do this is. So mass redirects, usually the use case is you have a previous platform where you migrated from with different URLs, or you're just changing your URL schemes. Maybe you did an upgrade or something like that. And you want to make sure that your previous search engine results stay intact, that you don't lose those search engine results. So you want to do a redirect or a rewrite, whether that be transparent rewrite or HTTP 300 redirect, 300 3XX. So you can do that in two ways. Either you can use Fastly to do the redirects, or you can use the built-in Magento URL Rewrites feature included with Magento. Oftentimes people want to use Fastly for redirects, and that's understandable because it's very fast, and there's no cache warm-up associated with that since the configuration is on the edge caches. But Magento can actually be the right way to do this in many cases because there's no custom VCL required. So that makes it so there's less troubleshooting needed, less things that can go wrong there. And also with Fastly, there's by default a limit of 1,000 redirects that you can do because of the edge dictionaries. So with Magento, you don't have a set limit to that. And we've seen tens or even 100,000 redirects that customers have used without issue. So this is the Magento URL Rewrite import-export module. So by default, you can use the Magento URL Rewrite functionality, but it doesn't have a way to do mass imports or exports without having to do like manual database queries. So with this module, which we provide on the cloud team to customers, that makes it to where you can import in bulk. And you can find more information here on DevDocs at the bottom. So as I mentioned, we have seen customers use 100,000 rewrites with the built-in functionality without any type of performance problems. The rewrites table does use B trees in the database, so it doesn't necessarily mean that twice as many rewrites is double half the performance, right? Because it's indexed. And also, a common misconception is that with Fastly rewrites, it's going to be a lot faster with Fastly, and with built-in rewrites, it'll be slow. And that's really only true for the very first request. Once that very first customer hits that rewrite or that redirect, it's going to be cached by Fastly just like any other request would be. And so you get high performance on all of the high traffic rewrites from Fastly. So I'll show you how to do it with the built-in way, and then I'll show you the Fastly way after. So this is how you would do it with the built-in rewrites. You go to the marketing tab and then URL rewrites. And this is the page you would get to. Normally you would just have the add URL rewrite button, but because of the module I showed, which is provided by Magento Cloud, you have the import URL rewrites button, and that allows you, as I show you, you can upload a CSV, and then you say you want to add or update, or so on. And then this is just an example of the CSV. you'd have the request path, which is like the source, target path, which is the destination, and then the redirect type. 0 for transparent rewrite, where it just shows the resulting page without redirecting you, and then 301 and 302, which are redirects, and then of course the store code. This would just be an example of the previous CSV I showed you with request-test1, and it's doing a transparent rewrite to the home page. So you can also configure redirects using Fastly itself. So this is the Fastly section of the admin panel. You go to Stores, Configuration, Advanced System, Full Page Cache, and then you have Fastly here. Then you can go down to your Fastly configuration. You would go down to Custom VCL Snippets. Then you create a custom snippet. And then you make a snippet sort of like this. So here the name can be anything, but the type should be receive. The priority 100 is a good priority. And then here, there's different ways to do this, but this is the way I tested and it worked. In this case, rewrite value A is just a temporary variable essentially. And so I just do a table.lookup on the rewrites table, which I'll make later. And we take the URL that's being requested and we look up to see if it's in the table, the rewrites table. If it is, we set that value. If the value was set, meaning it was found, then we set the request URL to instead be the value of that lookup. So we're transparently rewriting the URL. And then I just unset the temporary variable. And there's also ways to do that for HTTP redirect as well. So then I showed you the fact that we were doing a table lookup. So now we have to add an edge dictionary, which is the table I was talking about. And you can see it's key value pairs. And then you would just put the source and destination URLs in your edge dictionary. Here's an example of that previous configuration, redirect-test, and this is loading the home page. This one looks a bit different than the other home page because on this one I had sample data turned on the other one I didn't, but it's the same thing essentially. So as I showed before, you would have to enter those items one by one, and also they are limited to 1,000. You're still limited to 1,000 with this, but you can at least add them in bulk if you use the Fastly API. And this is similar to the curl request I was showing earlier. You would just use your service ID and your API token that you get with your store. And then you can do a request like this and add them in bulk. So if you do have 1,000 items, you'd probably want to use this method so you didn't have to click so much on the admin panel. Also, one more thing with the Fastly redirects, the default limit is 1,000 for edge dictionaries, but you can increase that limit if you contact support. That can be increased a bit. All right, so now we're going to talk about cache cleaning methods, and I'll turn it over to Nadiia. I think she'll share her screen as well. Nadiia, I think you're muted as well.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Let me share my screen again. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. I want to tell you a little bit about cache invalidation, because we all know that cache not only allows you to generate fast responses to the site request, but it also uploads a significant amount of processing from the origin servers, bring up production resources. This is why efficient cache invalidation is an important part of keeping your website fast. And I want to show you methods we have for clearing part of the cache, avoiding not necessarily cleaning all cache together. As you know, every object which is cached for some period of time, and it's not requested from the server again, even if it was cached in our case on Magento side. But every cache can be invalidated and fresh content will be requested from the server side again. And there are two types of cache invalidation we have. First one is that cache can be expired in the first place. So we have this information in the headers like expires. This header has expiration date and time, and you can manage this age in Magento Admin UI for FPC full page cache configuration. Like you see on the screen, it's TTL for public content field. By default, you have 1 day TTL. But sometimes cache should be cleaned before its expiration, and it can be done by cleaning actions as manually as automatically. To manage cache from Magento Admin UI, you need to go to System, Cache Management. Here you will see like big form, and on this page you may flush any cache by text or even all existed cache which you use in Magento. In the top of this page, you may see two buttons, Flush Magento Cache and Flush Cache Storage. First button, Flush Magento Cache, removes all items in the default Magento cache according to their associated Magento text. So these are those entries that Magento reliably tracks and as its own, like folder var cache. If your Fastly cache is configured and used, pushing this button won't do any effect on it. When the second one, Flush Cache Storage, removes all items from the cache with Magento text, and it affects also other applications if they're using, and of course if you use Fastly, Fastly HTML cache will be cleared. In the middle grid, you see all cache types Magento uses. For Fastly, we are interested in full page cache, so this type of cache should be enabled that allow us to manage it. Choosing this checkbox and clicking to refresh button, all Fastly HTML cache will be flushed. So from the Fastly perspective, it's the same as you click on Flash Cache Storage button and be considered full. And on the bottom side of this page, you may see six buttons. In production modes, there are 6 buttons. First, to clear cache from Magento side for pre-generated catalog images and merged copies of JavaScript and CSS files. Other 4 buttons were added by Fastly extension. Actually, they allow us to make partial cleaning of the cache or whole cleaning at all. For button clean Fastly CDN by content type, you need to choose one of 4 types. There are HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and images. Choosing any of the type and clicking the button, Fastly will remove cache objects by content type. And actually for this, Fastly uses surrogate keys, which allow us to selectively purge related content. For it, in this screen, I show you the example how you can check all these surrogate keys. I added header Fastly debug as one, and for HTML cache, the surrogate keys is text. So by this key, Fastly clear all the such objects. And pay attention that this button, clean Fastly CDN by content type, it removes cache from all stores you have. But if you want to clean just cache from one store, you need to use next button, clean Fastly CDN by store. It also do their cleaning by surrogate keys, but there it is for store keys. And also pay attention that it removes store-related information. It doesn't remove cache with images, CSS, or JavaScript. And third Fastly button, Quick Purge, allows you to clean cache for certain URL. You need to provide whole URL, including domain, and content for this page will be clear. The last one, page all, actually, you should be, you need to be careful with this button because it's clear absolutely all Magento cache, and together with all cache Fastly has. It's for all stores, HTML, images, CSS, and so on. So it's like a whole purging. And why I'm asking you to be careful with it, because purging too much cache using purge all may increase your website's load time while the cache will be rebuilding. And be certain that your origin can handle this spike in traffic. Otherwise, you may notice the increasing of 503 errors. In addition, we have CLI commands, Magento CLI commands, which also allow you to clear cache. Two main commands for cleaning cache, cache clean and cache flush. The main difference between them is that cleaning cache, clean cache, it's cleaning cache types, delete all items by types from enabled Magento cache types. Actually, by idea, it should be the same as we had for previous Flush Magento cache, but Fastly also clear HTML cache when you use this cache clean command, even without providing a type. And the second one, cache flush, is flushing a cache type purges. It also might affect other processes, applications that are using the same storage. So it also flush all together with Magento cache and Fastly cache. Together with manual cleaning cache, we have automatically cleaning cache like this indexing, and also allow you to manage when a cache will be cleaning automatically. For this, if you go to Fastly configurations, you will see three fields like purge category, purge product, and purge CMS page. If you set values as yes, it means that after changing that item, like product, all cache will be purged for that item type. Here is also used surrogate case, and if you change one product with certain key, all other pages which have the same key, also cache will be cleaned for them. And sometimes you may notice an effect. For example, if you change something, like in this example, I changed category name. You clean the cache and you go to the page again on the storefront, and you may notice that you have the same content. Nothing was changed, and you see the headers is hit, so it's what's taken from cache. But if you reload the page, after that, you will see that column is updated, and you still have that X cache mishit. It's happened because Fastly use soft purging. So after cleaning the cache, it doesn't remove it at all. It just marks it as a stale cache. And when you download this page, for example, then Fastly still continue showing this stale content, and on the background it requests for the fresh cache. To configure this behavior, you may go to the advanced configuration of Fastly and see that use soft purge set as yes, it's a default value, and we recommend to use it. Together with this value, there are two more. It's a stale content delivery time and stale content delivery time in case of backend error, where you can manage the time when this stale content will be displayed for customers. For example, in case of an error, how long to deliver this content. An additional one we also recommended to set is yes, is preserve static assets on purge. So when flushing cache, it's flush only dynamic content and preserve static assets. There is additional way how you may not cleaning cache, but avoid caching of some of your pages. You need to create your custom VCL snippet, as Michael already showed with redirects. But here is an example of how to avoid caching for example, for category. In my case, it's category 1, 2. And pay attention on the priority, because we want to have this condition in the early beginning. So that's why you need to set is. I even would recommend not as in slide like 5 or something like this. In addition to cache invalidation, sometimes it's very important to see what's happening when a cache was invalidated and what's happening, what's triggered the cache invalidation, and so on. And for this, you may set up a webhook notification from the Fastly module. Using these webhooks, you will receive activity from Fastly, like information about, as I said, purging, changing configs. Originally, this integration is developed for Slack, but you may is elsewhere. So what you need is to provide incoming webhook URL. By default, Fastly module will send you information about publishing key, URL purge events, purge all and clean events, and publish config change events. But sometimes you need to turn on showing stack trace of purge all events. This is useful if you are experiencing issues due to frequent purges and you don't know what the cause of this. Okay, and additional part which I wanted to tell you today, it's about blocking traffic. And you know that sometimes we need to block some resources of your web application for concrete APS or geographic area. And you can do it using Fastly and configure blocking from the Magento admin UI. You also can use this feature to prevent bad actors from interfering your web application. But before showing you how to block some APS, I want to tell you about ACL. So ACL is an access control list that allows you to manage IP addresses that can be used for edge decision, like allowing or blocking access to resources. You can manage existing ACLs and together like creating new ones. ACL by itself has two parts, container and entries within it. So to create an ACL, you need to start, before starting using it, you need to create an empty ACL container first. So after clicking on Add ACL, new pop-up window will be open, and you need to provide here name for ACL container. There is also a checkbox which you may use to activate your container right after creation, and by default it is checked. So after creation, an empty container will appear in new version. So, for example, in current moment we used version 25, and after creating container, previous one will be locked and cloned. A new one will be activated with empty ACL list. After creating container, you need to add entries in a working version of a service. As you remember, we already attached an ACL container to a VCL, which has already activated. The data in the container becomes versionless. So all these new ACL entries are versionless. It means that any further changes to the data within containers, such as addition of entries, will become effective immediately. So new VCL version won't be created. Like here, you see. And the blocking itself. So firstly allows you to block specific IP addresses from settling your service by adding them to a block list. This feature conditioned and response that returns 405 error to anyone trying to access the service from a blocked IP address. There are three main fields: blocking type. So before, for example, you can choose a block list or allow list. Allow list is better to choose if variety of IPS is much less than block list. So before going to live, you want to enable access only for certain APS. So in this way, better to choose allow list. Also, you have a country list and the list of created ACLs. And how to enable the blocking? So you need to select at least one country or ACL, or you can use them both. You need to save config, Magento save config, and then click a button enable blocking. After any change to the in the country list or ACL list, you need to click update blocking config. It's for changing the blocking. And after that, if you go from the certain IPS, you will see a 405 error. But also there is an additional way how to block some IPS from your ACL using your ACL, previously created ACL. It's creating custom snippet. In my example, I want to block all pages for category 1-3, but allow it only for certain APS, like for my admins or for my team. And there is a condition looks like this. And it's also a possible way to block some IPS. This is all what we wanted to tell you today. Of course, there is much more information about Fastly features and so on, but that's what we have for now.
Thanks, Nadia. So we talked about, in conclusion, oh, did you want to say something? Right. So in conclusion, we talked about the benefits of Fastly, how it integrates with Magento Cloud, best practices to keep your performance high and keep everything running well. Talked about mass redirects for keeping SEO from migrations and URL changes, different cache clearing methods and how they work, what they do, and also how to block traffic on your site using Fastly. All right, so that ends the presentation. If anyone has any questions or comments, we'll take them now.
Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach the cloud channel. Guys will be open for questions. This video recording will be available on YouTube probably today or tomorrow. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Nadiia and Michael, for a great presentation.
Thank you, guys.